Okay, here's an article from a few years back that shows that Scots are descendants from a lost race from the Sahara, and DNA reveals it. New groundbreaking studies suggest that the Scots are descendants of long-lost tribes from the Sahara. In addition, the study also reveals that the Scots are very closely related to Napoleon Bonaparte. At Scotland's DNA, which is scotlandsdna.com, researchers combined science with history to create the full picture of Scots' past. Genetics, phylogeography, archaeology, and historical analysis, along with an understanding of human behavior in response to major historical events, are pulled together for the first time. Here we're seeing an ancient burial urn. I don't know if it makes it out in the camera there. You probably can see the one rainbow, but it's a double. No one start crying. The DNA results revealing Scots are descendants of a long-lost race of the Sahara are fascinating, and yet this is not the end of this incredible story. The first results of Scotland's DNA project reveal the Scots to be much more diverse than was actually thought before. A number of interesting groups were found. After testing DNA samples from almost 1,000 Scots, researchers found that 1% of all Scots are descended from the Berber and Tuareg tribesmen of the Sahara, which is where the Tuareg get their admix from. Another 1% have a recent origin in Iberia, and their ancestors having probably reached Britain via the trade in tin. This is trying to indicate a Phoenician connection, and of course a lot of people have known for years the Phoenicians. Not only just their name says Phoenicians, and it goes with the dye that they used to make was the Tyrian purple or whatever, but that they were known to have red hairs. It goes along with the phoenix also, but this study is based on research conducted by geneticist Dr. Jim Wilson and his team at Edinburgh University. One of the startling revelations was the discovery of DNA linked to Napoleon Bonaparte. The research team discovered that Tom Conti, who took part in the project, has a family link directly to Napoleon Bonaparte, the French dictator, although he's Scottish. It was discovered that the actor's DNA marker is Saracen in origin, and that his ancestors settled in Italy around the 10th century before one of them, Giovanni Buonaparte, settled in Corsica and founded the family line that sired Napoleon. So it comes back from a Saracen line that's from after Alexander the Great, right? And the Saracens. Some friends say they weren't surprised to find out Napoleon and I were related, but it came as quite a shock to me. In fact, I didn't believe it at first, the actor said. Here's an ancient picture that's kind of famous, and it's actually a recreation. It tells you who it is here at the bottom. This is done by Heinrich von Meditoli back in 1820. It was based on a mural that's found in the tomb of Seti I. Let's look at this real quick and have some knowledge here on the point, that because people see this quite often and a lot of assumptions and things are said. The one on the right is an Egyptian, the next one over is an Asiatic, the third one is a Nubian, and the fourth one is known as a Libyan. Going back through them again, the Libyan, if you look at him, he's got peacock feathers on the top of his head. Well, let me see if I can get that down there. He's got, not peacock feathers, ostrich feathers on top of his head. Supposedly some type of nobility. He's wearing some Joseph coat of many colors. But you notice that he has tattoos on too, all over his arms. Triangle here, lines, different little patterns. And you'll find that when they show them around his ankles and down his leg too, you'll find that they quite often show them tattooed. But that's not real unique. There's been a whole lot of mummies of the Egyptians that are found that are tattooed also, especially people working in the healing fields, and so they on their arms would have healing incantations written on them so they could use that whenever they're healing, kind of built into it. It's kind of pretty cool whenever you look into it. I've got videos on it. But they've even found that Ginger, the blonde-haired pre-dynastic Ghibelline mummy that was naturally desiccated before they even started doing the true mummification, actually had some tattoos on him also. And around that same time we have Utsi the Iceman, and he also has the same tattoos on him. So there are all kinds of connections with these people that used to put tattoos on him. Going back to, there's the Nubians. They didn't show up in the Egyptian dynasties till after the first few dynasties, and then there was a group that they called Nubian A that apparently got into a fight with them or something because they got decimated. And it took over 400 years before they showed up again. There were decrees where they weren't allowed into Egypt and all kinds of things. And Buhin, which is an ancient city that, or an ancient fortress, which really looked like a modern castle that we would think of today, but it was down there setting a point that Sesostris III set up, and nowadays it's underwater. After building the dam there that they have, the Aswan Dam, it filled it all up and took out all of the primordial people that were living there, and now they're submerged under, and that would be a hell of an archaeology to pull off now. They moved a couple of temples and stuff. People are usually kind of aware about this. I'm about to do a little clip video, if I can get away with it, out of another video showing you the actual structure and the way this place looked, and how all these guys are talking about how, man, that looks like a modern castle thing. Something that we saw in the Hittites and stuff too, but that's not real important. The next guy that's over is an Asiatic. And you see some tasseling on his bottom of his fronds there, and people have made all kinds of assumptions about this too, but understand that Asia in some ways encompassed Egypt in ancient times and their ancient thoughts there. And there was no Africa. Back to the first guy on the left there, that's Libyans, and all of Africa was referred to as Libya. So you can refer to the idea that past the delta there going west, this is the way they looked all through ancient Libya. And of course the Sahara used to be green, so endemic North Africans that you see right there, Berber types come out of those, but also the Phoenicians make Corinth and a couple of other places down the coast there. But they're real similar people. Regardless, Asia is basically outside the Klitsch, right there in the very front where the delta of Egypt meets the rest of the world. It stops being Africa at that little pinch point where the Red Sea comes in and everything, and then that's Asia right there. So you could think of as the Holy Lands as being in Asia. That's Asia. Yeah. The Arabs and, you know, all that area, that's in Asia. Yeah, that's, well, we call it Yemen, but to be more descriptive, but that's Asia. Anatolia, it was always called Asia Minor. Remember when I was in high school, there was a rock group that was out, it was real popular, had a few hits, called Asia. I remember explaining to one of my friends, or a group of my friends when we were out partying and stuff, that Asia, they were like, well, if you look at the album thing, the people aren't Oriental, what's the deal here? And I said, you're confusing with Oriental with Asian. And we quite often do that, but Asia is all of this area, and Anatolia used to be Asian Minor and everything. Kind of hilarious whenever, I don't know, a month later, going to a party at a lake or whatever, and I hear him explaining it to somebody else. He goes, you know, Asia. And I just smile and go on by. But Asia consists of that, and really it goes up to, depending on which way you want to go with it, the Greeks, which everybody goes off of course, with their naming and everything, said the Phasis River up there by the Caucasus Mountains and so on was the declamation of Asia, and then above that was Europe, and everything there was Europe. And of course everything west of that is Europe, And Europe was named from Europa, which was a Phoenician princess from Asia, so we get all kinds of confusions there from it. And Asia seems to grow out wider as we go over towards the east in our mind, instead of thinking the Soviet Union is still really Europe. Whenever you get over to the edge and Kamchatka and Yakutsk and places like that in Siberia. But Asia, and then you have the Orient, which means far east, and then that would be different, but people make conflagrations with that. Then we have the Egyptian here, and one thing that tries to confuse people, and people want to act confused about, is the fact that their skin is very much darker, or this is just a normal worker Egyptian, not a priest or lady or things like that, and it's shown in red ochre. Well, they use a certain symbology that people have tracked down, and it actually goes back to even old cave art, over 30,000 years old, where they're showing themselves and drawing out of red ochre. And they found that red ochre also was some type of sunblock that they could use, and a lot of people believe that they used to rub their bodies down with it and so on. But they always have red ochre males and pale women. You'll see the women be almost as pale as this guy here on the left. In fact, the guy on the left, if he's living right outside of Egypt and so on, would not necessarily be that pale. He'd definitely have a tan, and at that time there were a lot of Caucasians down there that could be pale if they kept out of the sun, and where they wear clothing constantly, if they took that off, that area would be pale, but they get an incredible tan going on. But it wouldn't be the strength of this red ochre that you see, but they only had 6 colors. Yeah, see, people, it's like they had the cheapest little color box here, and that's all they've got to go with. They were one of the first people that made paints and so on. So they have this red color, but that's the same red color that's on the Asiatic's skirt in a couple of stripes, and in the Nubian's sash that's on him, and in some of the decoration that's on the robe of the Libyan type. But you can see how light the Libyan is, but it's shown him to be probably nobility, along with the Asiatic here. Now, here's the other weird thing, is that the Egyptian nobility, of course, don't want to be shown as being pale and not having done work. In their own ideology, the king does the greatest of works, and so he's always drawn in this red ochre symbology too, because when you're in action and doing things and so on, and then you're drawn in red ochre. And you can see where they show women and priests in a pale light a lot of times. Some art you can see it flip back and forth too. It's kind of weird. But the Greeks use the same red ochre pale women and red ochre males. Not all the time, and some of their vase works and stuff. The Mitanni did the same thing. The Minoans are known from it. The Etruscans over there by Romans and so on that started that off. They've got a lot of them that show it, even with this same exact red ochre color. There's a lot of Egyptians you find with blonde hair and so on, even on the tomb walls and so on. Now that we're getting a lot of DNA from it, like this they're talking about here, there's really no question as to who these people were. For we're not questioning whenever we see Minoans and Greek art and things, whenever they show red ochre pale women, are we? No. Especially Ginger, that Caucasian. Pre-dynastic money. I mean, it shows you that, and along with it, if you just looked up blue-eyed Egyptians, you'll see these statues with these strange crystal blue eyes from the earliest dynasties, and it's before they came up with this constant phenotype that everybody really kind of looks like, especially the pharaoh. And so in the scribes and things, you can kind of see the way that people really looked. And you'll see that pale women and males and females. But another thing about this Libyan that's over here on the far left, that's basically what North Africa looked like. Or some nobility. People didn't run around with the fancier dress on and have ostrich feathers in their hair. That was a nobility situation and probably realize that. So let's just continue. But, well, one more thing. Go back through them one more time. So they're showing Nubians, but they don't ever show anybody that looks like Khoisan, Pygmies, or any of the West African primitives that are there during that time. They don't show any of that because they're really unknown at that time. These are the only darker skinned people that are really around at that time. People always try to make connections the other way, but it doesn't work out that way. And you know that the Asiatic people would be a whole lot darker than they are. I'm Irish, and I'm much more darker than cardboard or so, and sure don't look like this. But again, they're working off of 6 colors or so, or, you know, if you go back, it's 4 and then 5, and then they get a blue that doesn't turn green over time. And that became famous, Egyptian blue. It ended up being used to dye the blue men of the Tuareg people, and that's not the blue men of Las Vegas that we all know of, that play music on pipes and stuff, although these guys play music and do stuff and ride camels. We'll see that up here in a minute. So that's a Libyan, a Nubian, an Asiatic, and an Egyptian. The use of DNA allows scientists to use it as a telescope to look back in time at where our ancestors once lived. It can be an amazing journey that can take you to a really surprising place. Through archaeology, without genetic archaeology in the mix, it really became a stagnant point, and people arguing about pottery and pottery styles and certain things, and whether that was the same type people with something a little different going on, or whether it was some transfer, or whether these people had connections with each other marketing-wise, genetically, who knows? All kinds of assumptions were made. Once genetics steps up to the plate and you get a certain person at a certain period, you can tell what was going on leading up to exactly that moment. You can't really tell what happened after, though. But if you find some people later than that, what's amazing is you can deduce, and especially the more and more people you get that inflate this, you can deduce over time what went on from A to B to C through genetics. Yeah, it's quite amazing. Science. When Dr. Wilson discovered that some of the participants had DNA hailed from the Sahara, he had to double check. It says here, I didn't believe it at first and had to check it twice, but more than one, in fact, quite a few of your participants had a marker that is only found in and around the Sahara and among the blue men of the Taureg. Well, that comes from the Berbers, like they said in the very first point, and you can actually find a bunch of light-skinned, blonde-haired, red-headed, blue-eyed, green-eyed Berbers in the Atlas Mountain area and all around, leading into Morocco and so on. They're still extant there, although it's slowly melting away. So what on earth is that genetics doing in Scotland? I didn't know, and it took me a while to work it out, but what I learned is that it was spread to Spain by the Moorish conquest of Spain. And then it came up the Atlantic margins along the coast and up to France and then up to Scotland, said Dr. Wilson. Well, the first Moorish conquest, or the first of that Spanish conquest by the people of North Africa across that little bitty gap there at Gibraltar, the Pillars of Hercules, were done by the North African Berbers that were endemic there, but simultaneously, shortly after, the Islamic people were taking over, and so that's how it came into being. That, both of them being Caucasians, of course, but it did do a slight change in there. And you can look up Moorish art, and it'll show you a bunch of blonde and red-haired and bearded people, and they're around playing chess and doing all kinds of things. So once they had penetrated to that point, hitting the coast, they went up around there. Well, I did a recent video, too, that they're showing that genetics goes back a little bit older than that, and it looks like that they had done some type of exodus maneuver or just a migration long, long before, and that led to part of the Scots and part of the Irish, And there's also a connection with the Egyptians with Mariatin, who's known as Scoti, which means little flowers. And that's supposedly where the Scots got their name. And the first Mary Queen of Scots that was a redhead was from way back when, not the one that we currently think of whenever I say it. For Mr. Moffat, the author of The Scots, A Genetic Journey, the results have been fascinating. When the great Roman Emperor Septimus Severus invaded Scotland with the largest army ever seen north of the Tweed, 40,000 legionnaires and auxiliaries and a supporting fleet, he fought the Mete. They were mentioned by Roman historians as a fierce people, and much later noted Edoman, the biographer of St. Columba, he said, well, what did he say? We'll find that here in a minute. These are current blue men Tuareg people, and they're using dyed clothes to be clothing, and well known that they almost exclusively wear this blue type of fabric. But what we're seeing here is a portion of them. They're an admix type people. And them, along with the Fulani and a few other people, are ones that were going down and capturing the primitives for the slave trade that the Islamics were carrying on, that was going on for over 900 years before even the Americas were found. But people seem to diss that and throw that whole idea out and not even pay attention to it. But it's why these people have this appearance, but also from the Berber interaction from before and during, is why they have that marker that we're talking about in them. For you can look up a bunch of Berbers that are going to be blonde-haired and blue-eyed and green-eyed and so on. There's a famous beauty pageant every year. It's full of them. And that'll kind of let you realize the connection a lot more than if you were to look at one of these people. So the connection isn't from these people, but also goes to them, and you can find it in them still. That's a cool looking camel being all light and shit. That's wicked. Dunes seem to go on forever. No one knows the true origin of the Tuareg and where they came from or when they arrived in the Sahara. Yeah, well, it looked like they were spawned into being through admix from taking some of the slaves at the beginning of it all. But I don't know if we'll ever figure out exactly who came from what and ended up where. If we got more genetics from just before it all happening in different areas and then found ones from just after, it'd be a whole lot easier, wouldn't it? Then they disappeared from history, they said, but Dr. Moffat said, or Mr. Moffat said, but now they're found. DNA has uncovered a high concentration of a distinctive marker clustered around Stirling in the foothills of the Ochils and the homeland of a fierce Métis. These are stories only DNA can tell. Yeah, you wouldn't, looking at these people, you wouldn't say, well, you know what? They got an ancient Scottish marker in them. And that Scottish marker comes from endemic North Africans. That'd be real hard to get you to believe that that was the reality of this without DNA. Don't you think? Scientists noticed occasional tiny errors of copying as our 6 billion letters of DNA were passed down the generations. Known as markers, they found to originate in particular parts of the world, and through a technique called the molecular clock, they could be dated. This is where they find genetics, and where they are in your DNA, they can tell you at what point they came in and how many generations ago it must have been for it to be flipped into its place. New markers are being discovered all the time, some of which arose rather recently and can be specific to a particular surname or are concentrated to one place. Once a marker has been discovered, the next stage is try to understand what it means. He says, first we work out how it relates to other markers and place it on a tree. Then we study where it is found and estimate how old it is and infer at best as we can where it originated and dispersed to. And the first step is to genotype the marker in a large collection of known heritage, perhaps people who know where their ancestors came from. Our research and development program is therefore screening new markers we have discovered in those found in the 1,000 Genomes Project in a large sample of continental Europeans as well as British and Irish people, which I just did a video about Irish. Scientists at Scotland DNA say, and you can go to scotlanddna.com and see some of this information through here. The DNA results revealing Scots are descendants of a long-lost race of Sahara are fascinating, and yet this is not the end of this incredible story. Dr. Wilson promises more surprises. We are sequencing the whole genome of 7 Scots whose DNA is central to our history, and we are looking at the role of Neanderthal DNA in Scotland, Dr. Wilson said. Well, hopefully that's 2 separate statements, that they're sequencing the whole genome and coming up with ideals about where those people came from and their heritages, and perhaps also the role of Neanderthal. For something of that smaller percentage, while it is real important, I don't see that it'll be that much radically different unless they're trying to infer that maybe they went out of Africa this way and got this other Neanderthal in them and then came across North Africa and popped out over here, and it's not the same that maybe Celts have, and so on like that, of Neanderthal blend, if you will, because there's a slight variation of Neanderthals too, just like, well, there's a slight bend in Neanderthals, but before that, Homo erectus had a huge variation. I've done recent videos about that makes people almost, well, it got to the point they started naming him different things for the actual location as far as that goes, and at least as a secondary binomial nomenclature, like Homo erectus sediba or things like that, to say, well, this one's different, but it's from here. Now that they're looking back through that, they realize that the archaic species lived on a whole lot longer than people recently believed, in fact, edging on the last ice age, and then things started to change, not hundreds of thousands of years ago. So it says we can expect to hear more from Dr. Wilson and his team in the near future. Again, this was done like 7 or 8 years ago. So hopefully there's more out on this. I wonder if Egyptologist 7 could get a hold of this and try to figure out the track down on it. I mean, I believe the thing that I said and where it comes from, and North Africans and Berbers, and then those people known as Libyans that you see in the pictures here would have admixed with a primitive people in the Sahara, leaving them with a marker that strangely shows up also in Scotland. But it also shows a heritage from North Africa. But also remember that they mentioned that there's also a percentage in there from the tin trade that's also what they refer to as either biblical people or from the biblical lands, or they just refer to them as Canaanites or Phoenicians, because that genetic shows to be real similar. And in fact, those people are all the same. Like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy, and we'll get on to another interesting article. Let me know what you think down below. Peace.